Alright, so today I'm going to talk about carbohydrates. Are carbohydrates as bad as people make them out to be? Well, let me share some of my opinions and kind of what I've seen happen with clients, what works for some people and what doesn't, what has worked for me in the past, and just kind of my own experience with it. I've been doing this for 13, 14 years, helping people lose body fat, changing my own body. I've tried a bunch of different diets from carb backloading to carb night to Atkins to paleo to just counting calories. Counting calories now is the higher level of that would be if it fits your macros, just following macronutrient profile. But there are a few things I want to dispel or at least kind of talk about when it comes to carbs. And that the first thing is that not everyone tolerates carbs the same. And what I mean by tolerate is that some people will gain body fat faster by eating too many carbohydrates. And the reason for that is genetic. And one could argue and say that the reason why people get fatter, or why some people get fat eating carbs while other people don't, is that they eat more calories. And I really believe I'm kind of favoring that side more. That it's more the calories than it necessarily is the actual evil carbohydrates themselves. And my kind of position on that is that certain carbs are bad processed foods, like chips and cakes and junk food, Snickers bars, all these Halloween candy, all these treats influence people to eat more food, which increases caloric consumption. That is my opinion. That's my major opinion when it comes to weight loss or weight gain, with people who are overweight. The second also is just lack of physical activity. So, with this position of mine of kind of how I feel carbohydrates affect people, it's best to understand that when I recommend a low carbohydrate diet to a client, or if you want to embark on a low carbohydrate diet yourself so that you can lose body fat and body weight quickly, that you should really just know your tendencies. Because a lot of the time, what most of us do is we're all or nothing people. That's my observation. There is no balanced approach. You either have a perfect day of dieting or you have a shit horrible day. And you really don't want to have that philosophy. It's synonymous to saying like, okay, you're like a drug addict and you're going to stop doing drugs for one day. But then if you have one drug, you're going to do drugs until the day ends. That's just ridiculous. It's just not a healthy way to balance things, So what you want to really look at it is that if you have a piece of bad food or junk, it's not a big deal. Don't make it a big deal because in reality, the body changes really slow. And what people want is fast results. So what they do is they torture themselves and put themselves through very low carbohydrate diets that make them feel miserable, that are very hard to comply to, that get them fast results. And then what happens is the moment they eat some really good trigger food or high carb, high sugar food or some comfort food, they go off the rails and they fall off track. So it's just best to stay away from the foods that make you overeat them. And I know mine. Mine tends to be pizza, so I try not to eat any pizza at all. I try to avoid it. Other things that I tend to overeat as well would be yogurt. I eat a ton of yogurt. I mean, especially Greek yogurt. I'll freaking kill yogurt and ice cream. I'm a cheeseaholic. Those are my tendencies. You have to know what yours are, and you have to avoid them at all costs. Or not at all costs, but definitely most of the time. Maybe you'll have one day a week where you'll have your splurge and you won't have a ton. Maybe you'll have a lot more than you should, but if you keep it isolated the one day, the damage is very minimal if there's any damage at all. But when it comes to carbohydrates and fat loss, you can eat carbs. It's really about calories. Calories is the most major effect. And people will argue until they're blue in the face, but any quick fat loss has more to do with the way carbohydrates interact with your body. I mean, if you think about it, if you lose 3 pounds over the course of 2 days, 1 pound of body fat is 3,500 calories. Okay, so that would mean that if you gain 3 pounds in 2 days, right? That would mean you would have a caloric surplus of 10,500 over 3 days. Now think about that for a second. So for 3 days, you had a surplus of 10,500 calories. That's a little ridiculous. It's possible, don't get me wrong, but it's a little ridiculous because think about this for a second. If you are on let's take this for example, like a 180 pound male that's moderately active will burn about 25 to 2,600 calories in a day. Which means that if you had a 10,500 calorie surplus over the course of 3 days, that would mean you'd had about 6,000 calories almost per day, about 55, I think, somewhere around there, which is possible and doable, but it's unlikely that's what you did. It's usually a huge fluctuation in carbohydrate and salt intake. This is why it's important that you focus on a consistent method of nutrition when it comes to eating. If you're going to have 100 grams of carbs a day, stick to having 100 grams of carbs a day. If you're going to have 400 grams of carbs a day, stick to having 400 grams of carbs a day. Use carbohydrates as a way to measure your calories and not so much how much carbs you have in the day. Only reason why I would recommend that you stay on the lower carb side is for a good majority of people, carbohydrates cause people to overeat, specifically sugars. Typically you're not going to overeat fruit, but you will overeat maybe some Snickers bars, ice cream, and some Coke and candy. So keep that in mind. Carbs are not evil. It's really the way the food is processed and made that's sort of the evil, the details of the devil. Is those foods are made in a way where it bypasses appetite, so that makes you want to eat more of it. So it's important because they have the right mixture of salt, sweet, and sugar and texture that make you want to overconsume them. And typically it has a lot to do with sugar and fat and mixing those together. So carbohydrates themselves, they help give you energy, but you don't need a ton of carbohydrates. What you want to do is you want to have enough carbohydrates to maintain really good energy levels. You want to have your minimum requirement of protein, and you make fat fill in the rest. Or you have carbs fill in the rest. It just depends on your preference. That's what it comes down to when you're trying to lose body fat and you're trying to stay away from carbs.